All right. Well, hello, and welcome to Let 'em Eat Cake and Cookies. I am Jen Chermoshnyuk. I am a security engineer at GitHub, embedded in the sales team. So some people talk about shifting security left. I actually shifted my job left. And Jennie?
Hi, I'm Jennie. I'm the privacy program manager at GitHub as well. And we are small but mighty, and we're trying to make GitHub a great place for both employees and users in terms of privacy.
So we know what you're thinking, especially with some recent things in the news lately about the cake is a lie, specifically with what Ken was just saying about third-party questionnaires. So hopefully in the next 30 minutes or so, we'll be able to convince you otherwise.
But first, a disclaimer. Neither of the gens in this talk is a lawyer, and nothing in this talk should be considered illegal advice, requirements, or anything else for your work. This talk is for knowledge sharing and to give you a gluttonous sugar overdose to associate with alphabets of privacy, security, and compliance acronyms. Standard disclaimers apply. Snarky comments are our own or attributed loosely to others in the space, loosely. Also, where I or we share of things we've built up on GitHub, they are open source and freely repeatable.
All right. So if you think that popping shells is really where it's at for enterprise security, we've got news for you. It's not. So what is it about? Why are we here? Starting with the what? It's security questionnaires. Questionnaire is security practices and controls that you give to vendors, and they then turn around and give you lies. That's what a friend of mine said, who's a CISO, who sends these out. Personally, I think it's more an opportunity to be able to put your best foot forward and make a sale through showcasing your security and privacy programs and practices. Hopefully, a chance to build trust through transparent and non-BS answers. So very quickly, let's run through a few of the sort of more common types of security questionnaires. The first that we've got is the Google Vsac, created by Google. It's open source, happens to be hosted on GitHub, but it can be hosted in-house as well. It's basically an essay question that it starts with about your network and your systems. Kind of makes me feel like I'm back in school where I had a teacher who said, when in doubt, write more. Sometimes it's when in doubt, write enough to hang yourself. I don't know. Google's Vsac is a little bit sneaky, is it's tailored to the entity that's using it. So sometimes you get the bite-sized one-pager that's then followed up with 3 more courses. One thing that's kind of interesting that I've called my baker's tip for my folks that are filling these out is that you can actually download them as a JSON file so that next year you've got your answers saved from the previous year. It's a little bit like when you save the top layer of your wedding cake for eating on your first anniversary. So not to be confused with the Google Vsac, we've also got Vendor Security Alliance Vsac. This one is built by a conglomeration or alliance of fairly well-meaning big customers who get a deluge of these things. Some of the partners are Airbnb, Uber, Big Data, Palantir. One hesitation I have with this questionnaire is it's marketed heavily in conjunction with a pay-to-play company, where sure, it's one thing if you share publicly, but their terms and conditions, if you read their policies for privacy and sharing, they fully declare that they're going to outright use any control data that you share with them to market and make money off of. But anyways, it's not a bad questionnaire. It's another one that you'll see. Another one, this one is the SIG. It's a standardized information gathering. It's a set of questionnaires that comes, I like to joke in 3 flavors. It's really 2, but light, medium, and creme brulee. As in creme brulee, house scorching, burned down. It's just monstrously large. Either version, by the Sig or Sig Light, which are the real 2, are heavy lift. These are things that traditionally it's the super risk adverse customers, the financial services industry, insurance, heavily regulated utilities are serving these up. The fun thing about these questionnaires is they trigger, when you open them as an Excel file, a macro warning. So if you enable, first rule of security, right? Disable macros. I know my security awareness training is working because when my engineers call me and ask me if I'm going to kill them for enabling macros, I guess the awareness is working. In case you wonder what selecting those macros does, we've got a nice little Giphy here that 1 yes turns 1 question into 15. I do still wait for the day that when I click enable macros that I'm going to get the pop-up that says I am the weakest link, goodbye. So that is that one. HECFAT, this is a really new questionnaire. I've seen it sort of a handful of times, and each time it's come in with 3 or 5 or 6 different folks asking for them. So I guess I can tell what the period of time is for university conventions. It's kind of the turducken of security questionnaires because the first 5 questions are, do you have a SOC report? Do you have a CAIQ? Do you have a SIG Light? Please attach. And then proceeds to ask in another 500 questions, all of the same questions that those questionnaires have in them. So this is kind of my preference for the standard questionnaires. This is the Cloud Security Alliance Consensus Assessment Initiative Questionnaire, or CAIQ, hence the name of the talk. Cloud Security Alliance's questionnaire is not particularly married to one specific regulatory scheme or security framework. It works really well, particularly for customers or for folks like us who are not tied to one particular like NIST or ISO, but because it maps to all of them. So it's kind of something for everybody. It's got 14 areas that cover policy, it covers governance, infrastructure, application security that I get to bug Ken for, and basic control responses. So this is really sort of the tool that we use the most. And it's the one that I particularly like serving up to customers because it's a good first way of opening. Getting away from the questionnaires and more into the why or what is driving these questionnaires. There's federal and community and worldwide rules, regulations, and laws. So first one that is definitely driving some of these questionnaires is Fedramp, or the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program. This is the program that the US government uses to authorize any and all cloud services for the government. It is now officially required for all federal agency cloud deployments to use services that have these categorizations. It's not a certification exactly, it's called an authorization to operate, so ATO, and they come in low, moderate, and high impact. There's also another fun little one that's called tailored, which is typically between low and moderate, and it's where they keep shifting the goalposts on you. You need to be past the low impact for data use, but you don't really need to be moderate, but once you get to a certain level, then they want you to keep going further. The important one, the thing coming out of Fedramp specifically, is continuous monitoring. So that's a question that a lot of the questionnaires come up with. Next, HIPAA and high tech and high trust. HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It's the 1P HIPAA, the other is the beast, that is 2P. HIPAA is a law that obviously requires healthcare companies and anyone else dealing with patient health records is subject to HIPAA. Companies who are subject to HIPAA have obligations to protect the public the patient health information downstream. So they'll often ask for their vendors to sign what are called BAA, business associate agreements, making sure that you promise that you'll keep the same standards they do, even though you're not actually subject to HIPAA. HITECH is the Health Information Technology and Economic Clinical Act. This is actually encouraging all of the healthcare companies to modernize and bring records into electronic form so that they're more easily accessible. That, of course, though, promotes the security piece that needs to be done, which then pushes out to HITRUST. HITRUST is an audit standard saying that you meet all of the HIPAA regulations and rules. Like Fedramp, HIPAA and HITECH aren't questionnaires, but they're the reason for it. HITRUST, being the audit standard, is sort of where you'll see customers asking if you are. Main thing to know about HIPAA is there's some serious consequences with violation. Misuse or breach of PHI is bad news and can bring personal liability, though not a lawyer. I am thankful to have the clear direction from our company when I'm answering questionnaires to say very clearly, we will not sign the BAA. BAAs are bad news. HIPAA is kind of the one thing that can trigger to turn a chief security officer into a chief jailable officer. So not going there. Then for all of those of you who have thought, security is kind of fun, but maybe we should bring accountants into it and see what they say. SOC 2 compliance, or SOC compliance, which is the American Institute of CPAs, yes, accountants, service organization controls. Most folks are familiar with these. There's a couple of different varieties. SOC 1 is for folks that have financial obligations to stakeholders, for SOX, S-O-X, Sarbanes-Oxley. And then SOC 2 has trust service criteria in 5 categories of security, availability, process integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. Because they're accountant-led, they're pretty expensive, talking $500 an hour sometimes for these. But like the Fedramp authorization, if you have a SOC report that you can just hand to a customer, that is a huge sales win, and definitely a collateral piece that I may be guilty in saying that or tweeting out that I was never so happy as to have a pair of socks for Christmas. So last but not least, where SOC and Fedramp are very sort of American focused, we have ISO, ISO 27000. ISO, which is the International Standards Organization, is a set, specifically the 27000, which is what deals with information security management systems, is sort of a roadmap and best practice approach for helping organizations meet information security requirements by addressing people and processes as well as technology. So that is a very quick overview, and I will hand it off to Jennie for privacy, which is far more interesting.
I hope you think so too, and welcome to this whirlwind tour of various privacy regulation. So speaking of things that come out of outside of America, you probably heard of these 4 letters repeatedly over and over in your head, and you wish you would stop. What are we talking about? GDPR stands for the General Data Protection Regulation, and it's a very comprehensive regulation with the goal of standardizing laws and penalties across EU countries, but also across the world, because obviously EU data gets to other places. And elevate the notion that privacy is not only the right thing to do, but it's almost, or should be, an essential human right. So, but the Europeans know, like we were saying, that they're not the only thing on Earth, and data needs to be shared to operate. So they come up with this framework called the Privacy Shield that allows the transferring of data outside of the European Union, as long as you follow the requirements that it specifies. And the framework is also pretty easy. It just takes self-attestation. Privacy Shield had a pretty good run for about 4.5 years until a privacy activist from Austria managed to get it invalidated in July of 2020, which is, not even 6 months ago, while litigating with Facebook in Ireland. Actually, it's 2-0 in favor of Max Schrems versus data transfers to the United States. The first one he got invalidated was called Safe Harbor. Some of you might still remember it, which had a much longer run of 15 years. So RIP data transfers, thank you, Max. So now instead of Privacy Shield, non-European countries rely on a thing called the Standard Contractual Clauses, or SCCs. And in case you were wondering, yes, it's pretty much a mandatory question we have to answer affirmatively to when we fill out a questionnaire. Another good thing, delicious thing that comes out of the European Union is the cookie regulation, and it's part of the e-privacy overall directive. And if you ever had a doubt, the Europeans mean business. You might have heard just last week, Google was fined 100 million euros, and Amazon was fined 35 million euros by the French Data Protection Agency for shady cookie practices on their French localized pages.
Ouch.
Very ouch. After focusing on Europe, we're gonna go slightly on a larger scale. And there are many countries in the world with their own privacy regulations. We won't cover all of them, but I will mention a few notable ones. More 4-letter acronyms. Yeah, LGPD, or the Law for General Protection of Data. It sounds much better in Portuguese. And it comes to us as fresh as of August 2020. So again, very recent, not even 6 months. Overall, LGPD has a very similar approach to GDPR in terms of what a data subject, also known as a person, is entitled to do or to get. The most significant difference in the LGPD versus GDPR is mostly notable in the allowed response times. And in Brazil, it's much shorter. It's only 15 days and not the 30 days that are allowed in the European Union. However, there's a pretty big difference in the overall approach to how data subjects can lodge a complaint. Under GDPR, the person is expected to reach out to the company first, and then the company's data protection officer will have to address their complaint. While in Brazil, it's very common for a citizen to go straight to court if they think they have a case. Next, please. Yep. And here too, we're going to talk a little bit about Russia. You might get a little confused with the other picture in the frame, but you should be in the mindset of what stays in Russia. Sorry, what happens in Russia stays in Russia. There you go, urban joke. Perhaps it's because there's a vast amount of free space in Siberia and cooling data centers comes very cheap there. Either way, the Russians passed a bill that proclaims that any data that was produced in Russia has to stay on Russian soil.
Trust but verify? No. Sorry.
Mother Russia does not trust. Last stop on our world tour is Canada with their PIPDA, that's how they call it, or the Personal Information Protection of Electronic Documents Act. That's a mouthful. Our close neighbors from up north passed this data protection bill all the way back in 2000, and it has been doing pretty well. However, 20 years into it, they've started work on revamping their data protection regulation, and to do that, they're generalizing a bill that originated in Quebec. Okay? Let's go back home, and turns out that all 50 states in the US, as well as Washington, D.C., Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands have regulation detailing requirements for electronic data breach notifications. On top of that, a few states have passed more specific bills covering physical data protection, as well as a few other tidbits, and we'll cover just a couple. First, we'll go to sunny California. You might have heard of CCPA or CPRA, more 4-letter acronyms. Looks like California has a lot to offer, not just beach bums, and they do care about customer privacy as well. the highlight of this bill is that each resident of California may object to their data being sold to advertising companies. That's very short. There's a lot more that's covered in that bill. Fun fact, some companies apply that regardless of where you are at, or maybe it's because my final destination was in California. So I just want to say kudos Philippine Airlines on a beautiful check-in experience when flying back from Thailand last winter. I missed you so. Last but not least in our tour of the US is the Illinois Biometrics Act. If you're a resident of Illinois, any company must obtain your explicit consent before they can process your biometric data. That means fingerprints, palm prints, facial scans, etc., etc. Yes, you heard it right, Facebook. That means no auto tagging group photos.
Fun. Does that mean that you also have right to consent, like GDPR? Oof. So we've talked a lot about the what. How about some why? Why do we fill these out? For our health? We did discuss HIPAA and high trust, but mostly legal due diligence. We've got to know what we don't know. Whether it's mergers and acquisitions, where you may be acquiring somebody else's bad cyber hygiene, or if you've tried to get cyber insurance recently, you've got to prove that you have your vendors managed. Want to win government contracts? You've got to be able to show you don't use things in your systems like Huawei or Kaspersky that we've got executive orders coming out saying we can't use. But this is my favorite. And I made my boss spit coffee out of his nose when I said that sex has been usurped. It's actually security that sells these days. Anything that shortens the spin of the sales cycle, while we can't exactly lob the cake over the wall and be done, along with Fedramp ATOs, SOC reports, not business associated agreements, if you can avoid them, but business impact assessments like privacy has. Anything that you can proactive and be pro-offering before your customer serves up a questionnaire is a good thing. Asking about security concerns up front, making sure that the salespeople have sort of a basic security and privacy vocabulary helps to keep the security heartburn and the deal killing to a minimum. It's kind of funny when security and privacy can actually be the department of yes, and here's how, rather than department of no. So who fills these out? Well, obviously Jennie and I do. The question tends to be, with typically RFIs historically, it's finance folks, right? Because they're the ones that have the information about where the company's registered, and how many people, and what the org chart looks like. Problem becomes security and privacy gets a little bit particular with context. So as you can see with this carrot, it's close, but not quite. When you ask a finance person like my husband about encryption, they're like, well, sure, I can use TLS to encrypt things, data at rest. Like, okay, sure. Context really matters. So having some sort of framework or something that gives the folks that are filling these things out context. Personally, as an SME and an old hat, can sometimes machine accounts is the right answer, and sometimes it's a very wrong answer. So I need to know what the context is 2 questions before, 2 questions after. Oftentimes I get people throwing one question at me. It's like, little context, please. So should security be filling these out? Do you really want your platform engineers, your application security team, threat hunters, or CERT filling these out? Wouldn't you prefer that they actually be doing their day job and like burning down tech debt and protecting you and us from whatever is out there? So it oftentimes falls to sales. So how do you get sales folks to deliver the right answers and real answers? And how do you scale it? Because they just keep coming more and more. No matter whose job it is to fill out these questionnaires, Sometimes it's a trickle, other times it's a complete deluge, which is certainly now, as we've seen with the Max Schrems 2 decision recently. The privacy questionnaires that we thought were coming with GDPR that sort of trickled in have just gone boom, and we are suddenly buried in them. So we've tried the tiered approach with tiers, T-I-E-R-S, rather than T-E-A-R-S. To general tier, for the tier 1, you've got general users, free and legacy accounts on standard terms of service. They get purely your prepared collateral. So if you've got a SOC, not so much, but if you've got the cake, let them eat cake. Tier 2 legacy accounts, they've got a little bit larger spend. They're on the corporate terms of service. Start with the cake, but we'll give them a little bit more icing. We can give them the NDA protected sales collateral, like the SOC reports, if you've got ISO certification. Tier 3, so really the folks that are paying you big bucks and want to know that all of their data is going to be safe and secure, and you're going to promise your firstborn, yes, we'll fill out your questionnaire, and we'll even allow you to have seconds, but it may take longer to be served as it takes more preparation. So again, we're talking about sort of those small tiers, about the tiers saving tiers. It's a nice idea, but it isn't always easy to say no. Particularly salespeople don't ever want to say no. Oh, come on, pretty please, just for me. Sometimes we really do, for sanity's sake and bandwidth of resources, need to draw a line. So thresholds or other things. We're not going to fill out a Google Vsac, or particularly the SIG, which is 1,000+ questions. Yes, 1,000. For a free optional add-on, particularly if you're not a paying customer. But this isn't our decision. But in this case, the head chef or VP of security, or sorry, of sales, is who makes the ultimate call, because it is a business call, not a security call in this case. But for scaling and reproduction and giving really good guardrails for sales folks who are not security engineers or privacy engineers, that you want to make sure that they've got some real answers. It's sort of creating a cookbook or a guide to be able to serve up responses. You get all of the subject matter experts, the lawyers, the privacy, the security folks at the table once. You get good, solid answers, and then you figure out how to serve them up over and over and over again until something changes. For us, we've actually got a little automation here, just like these cookies, with a Slack bot that you can actually type in with a little bit of coffee script and a whole bunch of frequently asked questions and answers in a markdown file. We've figured out a way to put answers into our whole team's hands and hopefully prevent some of the half-baked answers. And again, we will share this if anyone's interested, and it is 100% open source. Little Hubot that answers questions in Slack. You can type .secq and add a security term, and it will pull from our markdown file. This is a little bit of a eye chart, but I can do .rem, or for remember, and the cake, and it pulls up the link for where the cake can be served from. SECQ Fedramp, and it gives me an answer of where I can find for Fedramp. And Hubot at the very bottom here is reminding us that he, like we, know that software is awful. So we talked about how to handle them. How do we handle sales folks who just don't want to say no? We don't do that yet. Or if you're a small company and you have an onboarding list that's a Google spreadsheet, focus on automating processes that you do have and customer data protection. Questionnaires should be a sales tool, but like many small SaaS, your change management is kind of lightweight. There's going to be holes. No one is expecting anything perfect. Certainly if I'm the one decorating the cake. But sharing is caring. And if we don't have something, it's a great opportunity for the sales folks to share that, we're not quite there, but it's on the roadmap. So just a quick way to say, to give our sales folks who really, really don't want to say no, an honest way of saying no, but it's coming. So hopefully with all of those tools, we've convinced you that the cake is not a lie. So, time for questions if we have any.
And thank you, by the way, again. I'm watching another channel for questions and pass along any of those questions and add, let's see, some of the folks back onto the feed. So a few things just real quick while we wait for any questions to roll in. Like I said, thank you both again. Jennifer and Jennie, you mentioned it. We're coworkers at GitHub. Jennifer and I have talked for a long time. Super great resource, very knowledgeable. And there were a couple things that were super interesting. One was the way that you easily broke down sort of like what you can have. You can have cake, and cookies. You can do this, you can do that. That's very memorable and an easy way to break it down. I also thought it was super interesting, given like having gone to Brazil and knowing sort of the culture, that they were more stringent. That was interesting to me because I would have thought they'd be more laid back on this. So it being like 15 versus 30 days was pretty interesting. Didn't expect that.
Maybe it's the money. I mean, there's some pretty good fines. I don't know about the Brazilian one specifically, but there's some pretty hefty fines to be lobbied with some of those laws.
Yeah,
I couldn't believe that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
You could say that the process is actually less stringent, right? Because if you're expected to file an official complaint with the company and then wait for the DPO to respond, and then maybe it goes to court, then in Brazil, like, oh, I think I have a case. I'm going to try it.
Yeah.
One thing you mentioned too with Facebook was you had mentioned auto tagging was not possible, and that was just limited to anyone that was posting photos from Illinois? Is that how that works? Or like, it's interesting, I guess, just the implication in general that you would have to potentially modify your tech per region. So
that's definitely a challenge that I've noticed in when I switched to the privacy field. In my past, I was a developer, and it all seems like everyone heard about the big ones like GDPR, but then you don't think about all the smaller ones, and especially an area we didn't cover at all is actually what happens to employee data and how many specific employment laws you need to follow, whether it's per country or per state. And in the questionnaires that I've been seeing recently, I've definitely seen an increase in companies asking more privacy-related questions, but also questions both about their customers' data, but also their employees' data. So for example, what sort of employee data will you retain as a service if we use your services, like your product?
Right. I mean, yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. It's so interesting that. Sorry, go ahead.
And I didn't answer the original question, but so the specific case that was with Facebook is that they use some database of photos to train their AI to identify faces, and then turns out that some of those photos were of Illinois residents, and then Facebook never collected consent about those residents. So, and the Illinois people filed a lawsuit and they won. And essentially, it's not like one way to think about it is that you need to modify your practices. Like you can't just apply in bulk whatever you're trying to do. The other way to think about is that you need to know what data you're using, where it's coming from, right? So like don't just go and take a random picture off the internet. Know the ancestry of what you're doing.
Yeah, be responsible in your practices is essentially. So I think what you're saying in the collection of data. Yeah, no, I love this stuff, especially it's interesting just to hear that security is actually a selling point now. I think I speak for probably most of the people on this call, probably a lot of the people listening and the folks that will listen. That's not usually how we feel it's looked at. So it's surprising to hear, and in a positive way, surprising to hear that. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely love you two addressing all of the surveys that come out of client-driven compliance requests and requirements, and who are you going to get to fill all that stuff out? Are you going to take time away from your security engineers or the people that are doing red teaming to pause and fill all that information out? And then also how you scale that. That was both of those components were great to hear about.
Yeah, we're still working. I think we actually have headcount to help us scale coming. So if you know anybody that really enjoys answering these things and chatting with a Hubot. Yeah.
Yes, awesome. Well, so we're going to have some of the other folks join back on this call. Again, we really appreciate you taking your time. I know this was no small effort. I know that I really bugged you to do this talk. So thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. Seriously.
Thank you.